Imagine having your 17-year-old daughter dragged away by men claiming to be HOA security, all because your garden gnomes didn't match their approved color palette. That's exactly what happened to me last summer, and what those power-hungry HOA tyrants didn't know was that I spent 18 years as a federal marshal before becoming a single mom. They picked the wrong mother to intimidate that day. I watched them drag my daughter into their security vehicle while neighbors filmed on their phones. But what happened next left the entire community speechless. How far would I go to teach these wannabe cops a lesson they'd never forget? And what dark secrets would I uncover about our seemingly perfect neighborhood? After retiring from federal law enforcement, I moved with my daughter Ellie to Cedar Creek Estates, a quiet suburban community with well-maintained lawns and friendly neighbors. I'd earned this peaceful life after nearly 2 decades of dangerous assignments protecting witnesses and hunting fugitives. The first 3 years were everything I'd dreamed about during those long stakeouts and tense courtroom assignments. I restored my grandfather's classic '67 Mustang in the driveway, coached Ellie's softball team to the county championships, and even won Garden of the Month, twice with my collection of rare hydrangeas. My neighbors appreciated having a former law enforcement officer nearby, and I enjoyed being known as just Ellie's mom instead of Marshal Sullivan. We had neighborhood barbecues every holiday. The kids played together while the adults shared stories on back patios. I formed close friendships with several neighbors, particularly Janet Grossman, a 72-year-old widow next door who became like a mother to me. She watched Ellie after school when I picked up security consulting work, and I helped her with home repairs and drove her to medical appointments. The HOA existed, but it was reasonable back then, mostly focused on coordinating community events and ensuring critical maintenance. The quarterly fees were modest and transparent. When someone violated a rule, they received a polite reminder, not a threatening letter with a fine. Everything changed last fall when our longtime HOA president moved to Florida. A special election was held to replace him, but it was scheduled on a Tuesday morning when most residents were at work. Only 22 out of 156 homeowners voted. That's how Franklin Mercer became our new HOA president with just 14 votes. Mercer had run unsuccessfully for city council 3 times, losing badly each time. He constantly reminded everyone of his Harvard Business School education, though he somehow never mentioned graduating. His house was the largest in the community, with security cameras covering every angle and a personalized flagpole flying both the American flag and a custom banner with his family crest. Within days of his election, the friendly community I'd come to love began to change into something unrecognizable. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs immediately. I'd seen that same hunger for control in the eyes of many criminals I'd helped put away. Mercer wasted no time implementing what he called his Community Excellence Initiative. At his first HOA meeting as president, he unveiled a thick binder of new clarified regulations that expanded the original 12-page rulebook into a 64-page manifesto controlling everything from acceptable mailbox designs to approved brands of lawn fertilizer. His most alarming announcement was the creation of the HOA Compliance Task Force. 3 former mall security guards equipped with matching navy blue uniforms, clipboards, and SUVs with amber roof lights. Mercer introduced them as community safety specialists, with extensive law enforcement backgrounds. In reality, none had actual police experience, but they certainly acted like they did. Their leader was Ron Packard, a stocky man in his 50s who had failed the police academy entrance exam 3 times but wore a belt with accessories that mimicked actual law enforcement gear. His sidekicks were Dean Wilkins, a thin, nervous man who constantly adjusted his too-tight uniform, and Troy Barker, a young weightlifter who seemed to view the position as a stepping stone to actual police work. They began patrolling the neighborhood daily, measuring grass height with rulers, documenting holiday decorations that remained up past their removal deadlines, and photographing any vehicle parked in driveways for more than 48 hours. Residents received violation notices for increasingly trivial issues. A hose left uncoiled, wind chimes deemed excessively resonant, or bird feeders attracting non-approved wildlife. The first major conflict occurred when Janet, my elderly neighbor, received a $500 fine for unapproved bird feeder placement. The feeder had hung in the same spot for 12 years. When I helped her prepare an appeal letter citing the actual bylaws, Mercer personally denied it, claiming executive authority to interpret regulations as needed for community welfare. I noticed something disturbing about the pattern of enforcement. The most aggressive fines targeted specific homeowners, the elderly, single women, and families where the primary breadwinner traveled frequently for work. Meanwhile, Mercer's friends and supporters, mostly older men who attended his weekly poker games, received warnings instead of fines for identical violations. During the monthly HOA meeting, I formally challenged this selective enforcement. Mercer's face flushed red with anger as I cited specific examples and relevant bylaws. He abruptly ended the meeting by pounding his custom gavel, declaring that disruptive elements would not be tolerated. As residents filed out, I overheard him speaking to Packard. "Make a note of Ms. Sullivan's property. I think we need to conduct a thorough inspection." That evening, I received my first violation notice. $250 for excessive oil residue on driveway surface from working on my classic car. The battle lines had been drawn, and Mercer had clearly identified me as his primary obstacle to complete control of Cedar Creek Estates. The harassment escalated with alarming speed. Every morning I'd find Packard or one of his deputies parked across from my house, documenting my every move with cameras. They followed Ellie to the bus stop, claiming they were ensuring student safety. My mailbox was vandalized twice in 1 week. When I installed a security camera to catch the perpetrators, I received a violation notice for unauthorized surveillance equipment. The most disturbing incident occurred when my work schedule, including confidential security consulting appointments, was mysteriously posted on the community bulletin board. As a former federal marshal who occasionally worked with witnesses, this breach wasn't just annoying, it was potentially dangerous. After filing a police report that went nowhere, I decided to confront Mercer directly. I drove to his house on a Sunday afternoon, maintaining my professional demeanor despite my growing anger. Mercer answered the door in a smoking jacket, like some caricature of old money, though neighbors said he'd moved to Cedar Creek after a bankruptcy just 5 years earlier. "Miss Sullivan," he said with a smirk, "what a surprise. Coming to apologize for disrupting our community harmony." "I'm here about the posting of my private schedule," I said calmly. "That information was confidential and potentially compromises my security work." He leaned against the doorframe with practiced casualness. "Perhaps you should be more careful about where you leave your papers. In any case, I have no idea what you're talking about." "Then how would you explain that the document was printed on paper with the HOA watermark?" I pressed. His smile faded slightly. "You know, Miss Sullivan, women who live alone should be more concerned about their safety in today's world. Especially women with teenage daughters." The threat was unmistakable. Before I could respond, he continued, "By the way, I understand Ellie is applying to State University next fall." "Excellent choice. Did you know I'm on the Alumni Advisory Board? I have quite a file on her activities that I could include with her application. Supporting our community initiatives might ensure her materials don't get lost in transit." As a former federal marshal, I'd faced down armed fugitives without flinching, but something about Mercer's casual threat against my daughter chilled me to the bone. Still, years of training kept my expression neutral as I replied, "I appreciate your concern for my daughter's education. I'm sure the university would be very interested in hearing about your approach to recommendation letters." His eyes narrowed. "Careful, Miss Sullivan. Cedar Creek has ways of handling problem residents. I'd hate to see your property values affected by community perception issues." As I walked back to my car, I knew this wasn't just about garden gnomes or mailbox designs anymore. This was about power, control, and a man who wouldn't stop until everyone bent to his will. I needed to know if I was alone in this fight or if others were experiencing similar intimidation. Using my old investigation skills, I began quietly reaching out to neighbors who had received excessive violations. Many were reluctant to talk, fearing retaliation, but their silence spoke volumes. To avoid Mercer's surveillance, I organized a meeting at Denny's restaurant, just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I was surprised when 28 residents showed up, nearly a fifth of our community. Once people started sharing their stories, the floodgates opened. Martha Jenkins, a nurse who worked night shifts, had been fined for improper trash can retrieval because she couldn't bring her bins in until after her sleep cycle. Carlos Rodriguez had been denied permission to install a wheelchair ramp for his father, despite providing all required documentation. The Thompsons' children were banned from riding bikes on community streets after Mr. Thompson questioned an assessment increase at an HOA meeting. "He's targeting anyone who stands up to him," said Bill Foster, a retired accountant. "But something else is bothering me. Our reserve fund had over $300,000 last year, but the latest financial statement shows only $118,000. Where's that money going? And why do we suddenly need 3 security guards for a neighborhood with no crime history?" added Rebecca Chin, who ran a local pharmacy. "Those SUVs they drive aren't cheap and they're not in our approved budget." I shared my law enforcement experience. "This isn't just petty tyranny, there are potential legal violations here. Selective enforcement, invasion of privacy, possible financial impropriety." We formed an action plan. Document every violation notice, record all interactions with the security team, request formal financial audits, and prepare a joint complaint to the County Housing Authority. Everyone left with renewed determination, protected by safety in numbers. What we didn't realize was that Mercer had infiltrated our meeting. Dennis Keaton, a quiet man who rarely attended community events, was Mercer's eyes and ears. I later learned he owed Mercer money from gambling debts at those weekly poker games. The next morning, every household that attended the Denny's meeting received an official notice on HOA letterhead. "Due to concerns about potential code violations affecting community standards, your property has been scheduled for a comprehensive safety and compliance assessment. The evaluation fee of $750 will be added to your next HOA statement." The attached documents cited an obscure bylaw allowing for special assessments during periods of community concern. The assessment dates were all scheduled during working hours, requiring homeowners to miss work or face additional absence penalties. This wasn't just intimidation anymore, it was financial warfare. Mercer was attempting to bankrupt any opposition, betting that most residents couldn't afford both the financial and professional cost of fighting back. He'd clearly forgotten that as a federal marshal, I'd spent my career dealing with people who thought they were above the law. His tactics were about to backfire spectacularly. 2 days after our meeting, Ellie was returning from her lifeguard shift at the community pool. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard tires screeching in our driveway. Through the window, I saw the HOA security SUV blocking my daughter's car. Ron Packard and Troy Barker approached her vehicle wearing their Navy uniforms with unauthorized badges that closely mimicked police insignia. They ordered Ellie to step out of her car, claiming her vehicle was unauthorized despite the HOA sticker clearly visible on her windshield. I watched as my daughter calmly showed them her community ID and resident sticker. Ellie had grown up around law enforcement and knew how to handle herself, but I could see her growing frustration as they continued to block her path. When she attempted to walk around them toward our house, Barker grabbed her arm. "You're trespassing on community property," Packard announced loudly as if performing for an audience. "Your mother's continued violations have resulted in suspension of your community access privileges." Ellie tried to pull away. "This is ridiculous. I live here. Let go of me right now." Instead of releasing her, Barker grabbed her other arm while Packard opened the rear door of their SUV. "You'll be detained at the HOA office until your mother pays the $2,975 in outstanding violations," Packard said. "Continued resistance will result in additional security assessments." That's when Ellie screamed, not in fear but in pure outrage. "Mom, they're trying to put me in their car." Something in me shifted instantly. In my years as a marshal, I'd maintained professional detachment even in the most dangerous situations. But seeing these grown men putting their hands on my daughter triggered a response beyond anger. A cold, focused clarity I hadn't felt since my most high-stakes operations. I moved through our front door with purpose, not running but moving with the efficiency that had once made me one of the U.S. Marshal's top fugitive trackers. As I approached, Packard spotted me and tried to hurry Barker to get Ellie into the vehicle. "Federal Marshal Sullivan," I announced loudly enough for neighbors to hear. "Release my daughter immediately." Packard sneered. "Former Marshal. You have no authority here. This is HOA jurisdiction." They had managed to force Ellie halfway into the SUV. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, some already recording with their phones. Packard noticed the growing audience and tried to speed up the process, shoving my daughter roughly. That was the moment every line was crossed. These weren't law enforcement officers, they were grown men assaulting a teenage girl over garden gnomes and fabricated violations. As Packard moved to close the SUV door with Ellie inside, I knew this wasn't just about HOA regulations anymore. This was kidnapping happening in broad daylight on my own driveway. And I wasn't going to let them drive away with my daughter. As the security SUV's engine started, I sprinted the last few yards across our lawn. Barker was still outside the vehicle trying to climb into the passenger seat. I grabbed his uniform collar and pulled him aside with a swift control technique I'd used countless times in the field. He stumbled backward onto the grass, more shocked than hurt. Packard hit the accelerator, but the SUV had only moved a few feet when I reached the driver's door. Using the momentum of the slow-moving vehicle, I yanked the door open and executed a textbook vehicle extraction. My hand found the emergency brake as my other arm locked around Packard's neck in a secure control hold. The SUV jerked to a stop. "Federal Marshal takedown procedures," I said calmly, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "You have 3 seconds to release your seatbelt or I will consider it resistance." Packard's face reddened as he fumbled with his seatbelt. The moment it clicked open, I pulled him from the vehicle with practiced efficiency. His weight and height advantage meant nothing against proper technique. Within seconds, I had him face down against the hood of his own SUV, his arms secured behind his back in a standard compliance hold. "Ellie, get out of the vehicle now," I called to my daughter, who quickly scrambled out the passenger side door. She ran to the safety of our neighbors, shaken but unharmed. Packard struggled briefly, then froze when I applied slightly more pressure. "Ma'am, you're interfering with community security protocols," he gasped, still clinging to his imaginary authority. "No, sir, you are committing multiple felonies," I replied in the calm, professional tone I'd used during hundreds of arrests. "Impersonating law enforcement, false imprisonment, assault and battery, and attempted kidnapping of a minor. As a citizen and former federal marshal, I'm executing a lawful detention until police arrive." By now at least 20 neighbors surrounded us, nearly all with phones recording. Dean Wilkins, the third security officer, arrived in another SUV but stopped short when he saw the scene unfolding. He wisely remained in his vehicle. "Everyone here is a witness," I announced to the crowd. "These men physically assaulted my daughter and attempted to forcibly transport her against her will. That's textbook kidnapping under state law. They're wearing badges designed to imitate law enforcement while having no legal authority." 3 neighbors stepped forward: Alan Richards, Maria Gonzalez, and Peter Wong, all attorneys who lived in our community. "She's absolutely correct," Alan confirmed. "This is criminal behavior, not HOA enforcement." Packard's tough facade began crumbling as he realized the serious legal jeopardy he faced. "I was just following the HOA president's direct orders," he said, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mercer said we had the authority to detain residents for rule violations." "There's no such authority in any state in America," I replied. "And you know it. You're wearing a fake badge, carrying handcuffs, and attempted to detain a minor. That's years in prison, not a misdemeanor." As the reality of his situation sank in, Packard's demeanor changed completely. "Please," he whispered, no longer playing the tough enforcer. "I have a family. I can't go to jail." More neighbors continued to gather, drawn by the commotion and rapid text messages spreading through the community. I maintained my hold on Packard against the SUV hood, firm but not causing pain. This wasn't about revenge, it was about containment until proper authorities arrived. "Mom, I got it all on video," Ellie called out, holding up her phone. "From the moment they grabbed me until now." Barker, the younger security guard, had backed away from the scene but remained visible at the edge of the crowd. His face had drained of color as he watched his colleague pinned against the vehicle. "You too," I called to him. "Stay right where you are until police arrive. Leaving the scene will only add charges." As we waited, the impromptu community gathering turned into something unexpected, a public hearing of sorts. One by one, neighbors began sharing their HOA horror stories, emboldened by the sight of Packard's vulnerability. "They fined me $1,200 for planting unapproved vegetables in my backyard garden," said Eleanor Williams, a retired teacher. My son's college scholarship ceremony was scheduled the same day as my mandatory compliance hearing. When I couldn't attend, they added a $500 absence penalty, added Michael Chen. Janet, my elderly neighbor, stepped forward with her walker. They threatened to place a lien on my home because my late husband's memorial flag bracket was non-conforming hardware. Each story fueled community outrage. The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people, almost a third of our neighborhood. The atmosphere had transformed from shocked spectators to unified residents reclaiming their community. Packard, still secured against the vehicle, began to tremble. "Look, I can give you information," he said quietly. "Mercer keeps files on everyone. He has cameras hidden throughout the neighborhood. He's been recording residents without their knowledge." "Keep talking," I replied calmly. "The financial records are falsified. He's been transferring HOA funds to his personal accounts and his campaign fund. That's why we've been pushing so hard on collections. He needs to cover the missing money before the annual audit." A murmur ran through the crowd. Bill Foster, the retired accountant who had questioned the reserve fund, stepped forward. "How much has he taken?" "Over $200,000 that I know of," Packard admitted. "Please, I'll testify against him. I didn't know how deep this went when I took the job." As Packard continued revealing Mercer's schemes, the security radio on his belt crackled to life. "Packard, what's the status on the Sullivan girl? Mercer wants her brought to the office immediately. Use whatever force necessary." The crowd fell silent as Wilkins' voice responded from the other SUV. "Sir, there's a situation. Packard's been detained by the mother. There are witnesses everywhere." Mercer's voice exploded through the radio. "I don't care. Handle it now. That's a direct order." I looked directly at Packard. "This is your chance to make the right choice. Does Mercer have any actual authority to issue these orders?" Packard's professional facade completely crumbled. "No," he admitted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're just security guards. We have no detention authority, no law enforcement powers. The badges are fake. The HOA detention facility is just a storage room in the community center." As these confessions spilled out, a small silver sedan pulled up. A woman emerged carrying a USB drive and a stack of documents. Mercer's assistant, Lisa Parker, who had silently witnessed his corruption for months. Lisa hurried toward our gathering, clutching her documents nervously. "I've been documenting everything," she announced. "I was too afraid to come forward alone, but seeing this..." He gestured to the crowd. "You need to know what's really happening." She had worked as Mercer's personal assistant for 14 months, originally hired to manage HOA correspondence. "But it quickly became something else," she explained. "He made me create fake violation notices targeting specific homeowners, people who questioned him, people whose properties he wanted, and especially single women he considered problematic." Lisa had methodically copied financial records, emails, and even recorded conversations that revealed the full scope of Mercer's corruption. The documents showed regular transfers from the HOA accounts to Mercer's campaign fund for an upcoming state representative race. Other funds had been diverted to a shell company that, upon investigation, turned out to be owned by Mercer's brother-in-law. "The security force wasn't just about enforcing rules," Lisa continued. "They were gathering personal information on residents for leverage. Mercer has files on everyone, financial troubles, medical issues, family conflicts, anything he could use." But the most disturbing revelation came when Lisa pulled up surveillance footage on her tablet. "He's installed hidden cameras throughout the neighborhood without board approval or resident knowledge." The footage showed cameras disguised as landscaping fixtures, birdhouses, and utility boxes. Most alarming were cameras positioned with views into certain homes' windows, particularly homes with teenage residents. "Some of these are pointed directly at bedroom windows," gasped Maria Gonzalez, one of the attorneys in our community. "That's not just illegal surveillance, that's potentially criminal voyeurism." As this evidence was shared, 3 police cruisers finally arrived, responding to multiple 911 calls. The officers approached cautiously, taking in the unusual scene of a woman holding a security guard against a vehicle surrounded by dozens of residents. I identified myself immediately, explaining my law enforcement background and the situation that had unfolded. "These men attempted to abduct my minor daughter while impersonating law enforcement officers," I stated, finally releasing Packard into the officer's custody. The senior officer, a sergeant I recognized from community meetings, listened carefully as multiple witnesses corroborated my account. Lisa stepped forward with her evidence and Ellie showed the video she had recorded. We've actually had complaints about this HOA before, the sergeant admitted. But never with this level of evidence. As the officers were processing the scene, a black Lexus SUV sped around the corner. Franklin Mercer had finally arrived. He parked haphazardly and strode toward us with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. "What is the meaning of this disruption?" he demanded, seemingly oblivious to the police presence. "This is an unauthorized gathering and a violation of community bylaws." The crowd parted silently, revealing the police officers and the security guards being questioned. Mercer's expression shifted instantly from arrogance to alarm. He spotted Lisa with her documents and his eyes widened in recognition. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, backing toward his vehicle. "My security team was simply responding to community concerns." "If there were procedural errors, Mr. Mercer," the police sergeant interrupted, "we have substantial evidence of multiple criminal violations here, including financial fraud, illegal surveillance, false imprisonment, and assault. We need you to stay right where you are." Mercer's face drained of color. In a moment of panic, he turned and sprinted back to his Lexus. But he never made it. Without a word, I stepped forward and used my foot to precisely deflate two of his tires with the small tactical tool I still carried from my marshal days. Two neighbors who were military veterans intercepted Mercer before he could change direction. As the police officers approached with handcuffs, the once mighty HOA tyrant who had terrorized our community looked pathetically small. "Sullivan, be reasonable," he pleaded, locking eyes with me. "We can work something out." "Reasonable?" I replied calmly. "Like you were when you sent men to take my daughter?" The sergeant read Mercer his rights as the entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence. The scene that unfolded next was something I could never have anticipated. As police secured Mercer and his security team in separate patrol cars, the facade of power they had built crumbled completely. Mercer, now facing serious criminal charges, began desperately trying to shift blame. "Packard acted independently," he shouted through the police car window. "I never authorized any physical detention. He exceeded his authority." Packard, overhearing this from another patrol car, erupted, "That's a lie. I have text messages ordering me to bring the girl in. He said she was leverage to force compliance." Wilkins, the third security officer who had remained in his vehicle during the confrontation, approached the police voluntarily. "I want to cooperate fully," he said, hands shaking. "Mercer had us install surveillance equipment in homes during inspections. He has recordings of residents without their knowledge." As these accusations flew back and forth, residents gathered around Lisa as she continued revealing documents from Mercer's files. The financial fraud was even more extensive than initially thought. Beyond the embezzled $200,000, Mercer had created a complex scheme to force specific homeowners into foreclosure through excessive fines and legal costs. He targeted properties he wanted to acquire through his brother-in-law's real estate company, Lisa explained, particularly homes on the community lake and corner lots he thought could be rezoned for commercial use. The county prosecutor arrived, having been contacted directly by the police sergeant due to the serious nature of the crimes. After reviewing the initial evidence, she authorized a search warrant for Mercer's home and the HOA office. "We'll need statements from everyone," she announced to the crowd, "especially those who experienced direct harassment or received questionable fines." As residents lined up to provide contact information for formal statements, I found myself standing beside Janet, my elderly neighbor. "I always knew you were special," she said, patting my arm. "But watching you take down that security guard, I wish my late husband could have seen it. He was a prosecutor, you know. He would have loved seeing justice served like this." The most surreal moment came when Mercer, seeing his carefully constructed empire collapsing around him, completely broke down in the back of the police car. Through the open window we could hear him sobbing, begging the officers to let him speak to me. "Please, just let me talk to Ms. Sullivan," he cried. "I can make this right. I have connections. I have resources." The confident, imperious man who had terrorized our community was gone, replaced by a desperate figure pleading for mercy from the very people he had victimized. The officers ignored his pleas as they prepared to transport him to the county detention center. One of Mercer's closest allies in the community, a retired banker who had enforced many of the punitive regulations, approached me hesitantly. "I had no idea about the financial improprieties," he insisted. "We were told the strict enforcement was necessary to maintain property values." I simply nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his explanation. The truth was, many residents had enabled Mercer's reign through their silence or active participation. The community had work to do beyond just removing one corrupt leader. As the police vehicles drove away with Mercer and his security team, an impromptu community gathering formed on our lawn. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other in months were now exchanging stories, sharing contact information, and already discussing plans for rebuilding our community governance. The following weeks brought dramatic changes to Cedar Creek Estates. The county prosecutor filed multiple charges against Mercer: fraud, embezzlement, illegal surveillance, false imprisonment, and assault. His security team faced lesser charges in exchange for their testimony. The hidden cameras were removed, and technological experts were brought in to ensure no surveillance equipment remained. An emergency HOA meeting was held at the community center, with attendance nearly triple our normal turnout. Judge Raymond Michaels, a retired circuit court judge who lived in our community, was unanimously elected as interim HOA president. His first action was to suspend all fines issued under Mercer's administration pending review. The most inspiring development was watching my daughter Ellie emerge as a community leader. Despite the trauma of her experience, she channeled her energy into activism, organizing a Know Your Rights for Homeowners seminar that attracted attention from neighboring communities and local media. She worked with a civil rights attorney to create a simplified guide to HOA regulations and resident protections that would later be adopted by communities across the state. "What happened to me was terrifying," she told a local reporter, "but it exposed problems that were hurting many people. Sometimes it takes a crisis to bring a community together." The new board's first official actions were transformative: eliminating the punitive security force, reducing HOA fees to cover only essential services, and creating a transparent financial system with regular independent audits. We established a community ethics committee with rotating membership to prevent any future consolidation of power. For Mercer, the aftermath was swift and severe. Beyond criminal charges, his political aspirations evaporated as news outlets covered the story. The state political party withdrew their support, and his campaign accounts were frozen pending investigation. Former business associates distanced themselves, and his reputation was irreparably damaged. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't watching Mercer's downfall, it was witnessing our community's rebirth. Neighbors who had isolated themselves in fear now organized weekly gatherings. Gardens that had been abandoned to avoid citations bloomed again with personal expression. Children played freely in yards that were no longer subject to arbitrary restrictions. Sometimes standing up to a bully doesn't just save yourself, it rescues an entire community. Those HOA tyrants thought a single mother would be their easiest target. Instead, I became their worst nightmare. Remember, no matter what paperwork you signed when buying your home, no HOA has the right to steal your dignity, threaten your family, or make you feel unsafe in your own neighborhood. Some fights aren't just worth having, they're worth winning at any cost.